Hey, just quick heads up. This episode includes talk about suicide, drug overdose, and self-harming. If you are sensitive to these topics, please consider watching. It's a topic very close to my heart because I've never shared this publicly, but I'm a suicide survivor myself.
And as I've gone older, I'm seeing more and more, sadly, people dying prematurely from suicides or accidental drug overdoses or indeed on purpose.
Why do you think trans people are more likely to experience mental health issues?
You might be on the tube and a lady in front of you is looking at you like,
She's like
you are
disgusted.
disgusted. Yeah, that's a microaggression. And therefore we start thinking, oh, well, maybe I am like ugly or a freak or I don't fit in or whatever it is that we might have perceived from the external world. So we internalize that, which becomes internalized transphobia, and that can be really toxic.
We've heard you mentioned the term Chemsex before. Can you tell us more about that?
Crystal meth, sometimes referred to as Tina, is very, very addictive. So it's very easy to get hooked on it. You might do it at first to enhance your sexual experiences. Sex worker or not sex worker, anyone could be doing that because they think it's fun. But it can be very addictive.
Why do trans women use these kind of drugs? Loneliness, isolation, drug overdose, drug misuse, suicide, whether it's attempt or committing suicide. These topics are so real, especially in our community, unfortunately. But there is a reason, right? What is the reason? Hello everyone, welcome back to Trans Crash, the podcast where every Thursday we dive deep into lives, stories and experiences of trans women. I'm your host Pavi and I'm so happy you are here, you are watching, you are listening, wherever you are. It means a lot. Now, today's episode is a bit different. Our guest today is not a trans woman, but it's someone who is linked to the trans community. Because every year we lose thousands of trans women who die from drug overdose, suicide, or self-harm. And that's why this conversation is really important to have. It's not pretty, but it's necessary. And I've got someone who knows this area very well because our guest today is Marc Svensson, a founder of You Are Loved, nonprofit organization, and social psychologist researching LGBTQIA mental health. Hi, Marc. Welcome to Trans Crash.
Thank you so much for having me, and hello.
So tell us something about you, who you are.
Yeah, so as you already explained in the introduction, so I'm a social psychologist. I research LGBTQI plus mental health and well-being, as well as being the founder of You Are Loved. And those are the two things that I do.
Tell me something more about your PhD. You still studying right now?
Yeah, I'm actually on year 10, which sounds crazy.
Long.
But I'm doing it on a part-time speed, and whilst doing it, I had a different startup before for 6 years, and then I started You Are Loved 10 months ago. So I'm on my final year. I need to write up my thesis this year, otherwise I will get kicked out from UCL, and that won't happen. So my research, my PhD specifically, is I'm interested in sexual and gender minority people's identity information and how it relates to mental health, to well-being, to resilience, and all of these factors. And my PhD is specifically about emerging adults, so 18 to 29-year-olds that identify with a plurisexual identity, so bisexual, pansexual, or queer in this context, so being attracted to more than one gender. And it's kind of a long research project, but it's relevant because many of the people that have been included in my research and I've surveyed are also gender minority people, so trans or non-binary people. So we did a quantitative online survey with over 3,000 people, and I think 1,200 of those were trans. So the
big number.
Yeah, it's a big number. And I did 27 qualitative interviews with people, and the same there. I think even more. I think about 12 of them were trans or non-binary. So I know a fair bit about these things from my research, and we're looking primarily at how minority stress influence people's mental health outcomes and what we can do to improve it. So my research is focused on understanding why plurisexual identifying people have more mental health problems and report lower life satisfaction score than their gay and lesbian peers, and we as a community have more mental health problems than the general population, and within that the trans community, so the gender minority community compared to the sexual minority community, have worse mental health outcomes. And I think we will talk about why that might be later on. But yeah, so I'm interested in both sexual and gender minority people's identity formation and how it impacts our well-being and life satisfaction, basically.
Also, you are the founder of You Are Loved nonprofit organization, right? We met at the photo shoot for
which you kindly helped out with.
It's a topic very close to my heart because I've never shared this publicly, but I'm a suicide survivor myself, and I've lost more than one friend to drug overdose, and these issues and these topics are very, very real. I think they should be talked about more. And that's why I said yes to the photo shoot, and that's why I would love to, keep supporting these causes, and spread awareness and educate people on my show about these issues. So when did you start Your Loved organization?
So it started in October 2024. So it's a kind of a continuation on my research and my interest, and it's all about improving the lives of our community. And as I've grown older, I'm originally from Sweden, but I've been in London, living in London for the last 20 years. And as I've gone older, I'm seeing more and more, sadly, people dying prematurely from suicides or accidental drug overdoses, or indeed on purpose. And I'm seeing that within my community, so amongst gay, bi, queer men a lot, but the trans community, it's sadly even worse, for reasons of stigma and discrimination that contributes to us suffering with our mental health and sometimes using drugs as coping mechanisms and self-medication ways. So I started You Are Loved because I wanted to do something about this, raise awareness about the high rates within the whole queer community, even higher within the trans community than the sexual minority people, raise awareness about it, but also help people, signposting them to the support that they need, or helping them find a community that can help and address some of these issues that also have to do with loneliness, isolation, and so forth. So that was why it started. And we started out also, I think it's important maybe for your viewers, if you go after this podcast and you go and look at what You Are Loved is about, we started off focusing specifically on gay, bi, queer men, because there are certain issues that are higher amongst cisgendered men than cisgendered women. Suicide is higher amongst cisgendered men and women, a lot higher. 3 times higher, and certain drugs, chemsex related drugs that we will also come to, I think, later, are also more common in the gay, bi, queer male community. So it started out like that, and it was always the intention to then also include the trans community and queer female community. A few months into it, when there was more and more a kind of prejudice and problems with the trans community happened, and the government was taking steps to further persecute and remove essentially human rights from the trans community. We decided that we're not going to wait to be inclusive of the whole community. That needs to happen right now, because if there's something I would never ever want, it would be that You Are Loved is just like catering to one part of our community, but it's not inclusive about everyone, and especially the people within our community, in our wider queer community, that needs the support. So it was really important to me that we stopped this focus just on specifically queer male community, and that we were inclusive of the trans community and showing solidarity and that we are all in this together at the time where I think it's incredibly important. And there's also some divisions within the LGBTQ plus community of some gay men and lesbians that think that the fights for sexual minority people compared to gender minority people are two different fights, which I completely disagree with. Our equal human rights are very much interlinked. So that was important to me.
Yeah.
And with stigma and discrimination on the rise towards trans people, with governments both in the UK and the US obviously contributing to that, and sadly it's a direct positive causation that then we will also see more mental health problems within the trans community. We will see more drug misuse, drug addiction, suicide, all of those things. As stigma and discrimination increases, so does the positive causation. They will cause more mental health problems, more, which is kind of obvious, I think.
Yeah. Why do you think trans people are more likely to experience mental health issues?
The reasons for that are relatively clear and not maybe easy to understand, but they are there. Research supports. There's clear research and research evidence as to why that is, and it is because of the level of stigma and discrimination that trans people experience in society. It's directly linked to levels of mental health problems, and I think when we talk about trans people, trans women, maybe even trans women of color, their intersectionality plays a really important role. And it's important to understand that when you have one minority identity or one sometimes stigmatized identity, just being a woman, sadly, in a patriarchal society that we live in, can be problematic in itself. If you then add a trans identity to that, and then you add perhaps being a genetic minority identity to that, and other identities, that those intersecting effects have creates unique levels of stigma and discrimination that are not just stacked on top of each other, but they create very difficult levels of stigma that affects trans people disproportionately for those reasons.
So you've created this amazing organization. What is your mission with this?
Our mission is to raise awareness about the high rates of sudden premature deaths from suicides and drug-related deaths, and then take actions to reduce those numbers. And by doing so, one of the main things to do is to gather evidence and collect data and provide evidence that this to evidence the magnitude of this problem. So that's one of the things that we are doing, looking at conducting research into these issues. We are also providing bereavement support. Because of the high rates of deaths in the community, there is a real need for support to those who are left behind. And often trans people and queer people might feel that they are not getting the support that they need from more mainstream general bereavement charities or support services. So we have launched specific bereavement support for LGBTQ plus people, not just trans people, but for the whole LGBTQ plus community, that is specifically developed if you've lost a loved one to suicide or drugs. By all means, if you lost them for any other cause, we would never turn anyone away that have lost someone from cancer or any other reason, but they are specifically kind of developed for that. And they are led by queer therapists that are specializing in bereavement and in LGBTQ plus issues. So we've done that, and then we have launched a directory that will help trans people and queer people in general to find support if they need support, mental health support, but also to find social groups and community initiatives, maybe sports teams or whatever it might be, where they can find people to connect with as a way of addressing loneliness and isolation. That's also an issue in the community.
Yeah, that's a massive one, isn't it? Loneliness, isolation, drug overdose, drug misuse, suicide, whether it's attempt or committing suicide. These topics are so real, especially in our community, unfortunately. But there is a reason, right? What is the reason?
The reason for that, if we start with drug use, misuse, and addiction that could lead to death, a lot of people use drugs, right? Recreational drugs for many different purposes. Alcohol is arguably a drug that is used by the vast majority of the population. So we use drugs for many different reasons, to party, to have fun, but trans people might also use them as a way of coping with high rates of stigma, discrimination, also perhaps coping with trauma that they have experienced earlier
To
in your
numb
life.
themselves.
Yeah, so it's a way of, exactly, self-medication, self-medicating yourselves, or a coping mechanism. So I think when drug use is used in that way, when drugs are used in that way, sometimes it kind of works, to be honest and be frank about it. It does what it's meant to do. It maybe takes, but it can become destructive, and it can lead to dependency, right? And then it can lead to misuse. So when people are starting to take drugs that are most often used for recreational purposes at home on their own or on an everyday basis, it can lead to and so self-medicating can work to a certain extent, but it can also be dangerous. So that's drugs. So when it comes to poor mental health that can develop into suicide ideation, the reasons for it being so high in the trans community is the same. It's the high levels of minority stress that we experience. So minority stress is a framework that I use in my research to explain the disparity in mental health outcomes between the general population and the trans population. So it argues that there are both external and internal minority stress factors. And the external ones are discrimination and stigma. So it might be anything from prejudice events that is severe. You might be like verbally or even physically abused in the street by someone because of your trans identity. Yeah, or it might be smaller things, microaggressions we call them, and that might be, and they are really powerful, and people don't think about them as often. But microaggressions is, for example, you might be stared at in a disproving way from, I don't know, you might be on the tube and a lady in front of you is looking at you like,
she's like
you are disgusted. Yeah, that's a microaggression. Or you might walk into a shop and you want to try on some clothes and you need a sales assistant to help you find the right size, for example, and they are blatantly ignoring you and serving other people. That's a microaggression.
What about because what happened to me once, I was in a club and I looked like this, and I was asking for direction, and the guy said, "Go to the left, sir." And like he really, he really was like really loud about like the sir, like he wanted to make sure I heard it. Is this considered microaggression too?
No, I would say that's a prejudice event. I don't think that's micro.
Because it's not attack either, is it? It's like verbal attack.
No. But a microaggression should be, it doesn't really matter how we label them. Yeah. That is a minority stress factor. That is discrimination, right? Microaggressions tends to be more overt. I'm getting the wrong. Covert, overt. Which one is the explicit? So implicit. Microaggressions tends to be implicit. So they're not directly told. No one is saying you're disgusting. That would be a prejudice event. So I would say calling you sir, I would say goes further than a microaggression. Microaggressions tends to be unsaid things, it tends to be maybe looks, but those things really affect you, because the thing is that they all add up. Maybe once if you walk down the street and someone looks at you in a disapproving way, you can probably deal with that. But if you experience that every day, all the time, every time you go out in public, it will start to have a real impact, or it can have a real impact on your mental health, on your self-worth, and the way that you look at yourself. And then what happens when we talk about minority stress? So those are the external minority stress factors: microaggressions, prejudice event, external discrimination. Then what tends to happen is that we internalize these issues and we start having doubts about ourselves, often return to us internalized transphobia. So we might actually start thinking less of ourselves because we have seen how people look at us, and therefore we start thinking, oh, well, maybe I am like ugly or a freak, or I don't fit in, or whatever it is that we might have perceived from the external world. So we internalize that, which becomes internalized transphobia, and that can be really toxic for yourself, and it can also be toxic of how we treat each other. So you might, if you have views about yourself of not really loving yourself, or feeling like maybe these people that call me X, Y, or Z at a point, then you might start taking that out as well on your peers, on your trans friends. So internalized transphobia can be also a really powerful one. And then the last two, quickly. This is my research area, so I feel quite passionate
Please
about
share.
it.
Honestly,
Yeah,
it's so important to share this because I'm sure sometimes people have never heard about these things before,
yeah.
and it's such an important issue in a trans community. So
Yeah.
please go crazy.
Yeah, so the last two that we often talk about are concealment of identity. So concealing your identity, and that can be a different experience for different people. Not everyone can obviously conceal their identity.
Yes.
Like for example, if you're these minority stress factors are used to kind of explain mental health disparities for any minority. So you could use them for ethnic minority people. So for example, if you're a black person, you can't really conceal being a in this country minority, ethnic minority. So that would be impossible. But if you're a gay man, for example, you might be able to conceal your identity
Yeah.
by not holding your partner's hand or butching up if you're a man, whatever it might be. For trans women, many can probably also conceal their identity by behaving in a very stereotypically feminine way to make sure that they don't
Passing.
that they are passing in the best possible way. So concealment of identity, depending on your identity, can be another way that people kind of suppress who they are and concealing it. It might be concealing it to different people. And then the last one is expectation of rejection. So when you felt rejection in various environments, it might be another example. You might have worked in a workplace where you experienced loads of your colleagues were transphobic, maybe openly or maybe not, but you felt not very welcome and not very accepted in that work environment. Eventually, maybe you decide, I'm going to quit here and I'm going to find another job. And you do. And the day coming up to your first day in the new office, you might be super anxious about how your new colleagues will perceive you. Will they feel the same way as your old colleagues did? That is expectation of rejection. So you spend time in your head being anxious, worried, stressed, maybe feel sad, whatever it might be.
Me every day.
Yeah, and then maybe you turn up to your new office and everyone is super lovely.
Yeah.
But you've spent all that time in your
it
head.
happens so much.
Yeah, so it's kind of you're taking out. You're already expecting people to think that of you, so you're just assuming that that's what they do.
I think it's because our trauma shaped us the way we are right now.
Yeah.
Because the amount of trauma I've experienced as well really shapes my everyday reality.
Yeah.
Even if, as you said, exactly what you said, like if I'm going somewhere, I'm making these assumptions, these worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
And it usually doesn't happen.
Exactly.
But it happens in my head because of a previous experience, because of the past trauma. So this is really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's some statistics saying that up to 90% of when we do that, when we play out the worst case scenarios in our head, it's more than 95% of those never ever happen. So we spend so much time in our head being worried about things, and it affects us. It does. It shapes, to a certain extent, it shapes our self-worth and how we look at ourselves and how we value ourselves. And shaping that then impacts what relationships we create. So yeah, it has a so minority stress is a really powerful way of explaining why there are these disparities and why we see more mental health problems, substance misuse, and so forth in the trans community.
So we mentioned why trans people are more likely to use drugs. Why? So we've heard you mentioned the term chemsex before. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's a term that is increasingly talked about in mainstream media, even in the queer community. It was coined about in the early 2000s, around 2000, maybe 9 even, or 5. In the early 2000s, by a man called David Stewart, who did research on gay bi queer men, and he worked at the institute. He was London-based, and essentially, it's talking about specific types of drugs that are taken in a specific context. So chems that are taken for having sex or improving your sexual, and it was kind of developed to explain primarily gay bi queer men that are engaging in chemsex environment, but it's now quite recognized that it's also used. A lot of trans women are also involved in chemsex environments, or are using chemsex drugs, or however you want to talk about this, are chemsex users. And there are various reasons for that. So the Chemsex drugs that we typically talk about is methadone, and it's GHB or GBL, and then it's crystal meth, crystal methamphetamine. So those three drugs are normally the Chemsex drugs, and they are primarily used by gay, bi, queer men and trans women specifically.
Why do trans women use these kind of drugs?
So the reason why trans women are involved in chemsex or are also significant chemsex users, there are probably several reasons for that. One being the proximity to kind of our communities and how gay, queer men and trans women are quite interlinked communities or intertwined communities. A second one might be having to do with sex work, for example. So chemsex is used to, the chemsex combination is using drugs to enhance sexual experiences, prolong them, enhance them, lowering your inhibitions and so forth. So if you, for example, are a sex worker, which some trans women are, then you might be using these drugs for those reasons. So to kind of being able to go on for longer, being able to meet maybe customers' requests or just to enjoy it and relax. Many different reasons. But if you're involved in the sex industry in one way or another, that generally that part of the population tend to use more drugs.
And then you obviously come across with the drug overdose, not just using drugs. How does tell me more about
I think that is a concern when we talk about specific chemsex drugs. So trans women are using all kinds of drugs at a significantly higher rate than cisgendered women or the general population. So again, if we look at the queer community, we all use drugs more than general population, but again, trans people, trans women specifically, are using drugs even more. And so drugs in this context might be cigarettes, might be alcohol, might be all other drugs, cocaine, ketamine, whatever, ecstasy, whatever it might be. When we go back to these chemsex drugs, so methadone, GBL, GHB, and crystal methamphetamine, they can be particularly dangerous, and particularly the last two. So crystal meth, sometimes referred to as Tina, is very, very addictive. So it's very easy to get hooked on it. You might do it at first to enhance your sexual experiences. Sex worker or not sex worker, anyone could be doing that because they think it's fun. But it can be very addictive, and it can have a detrimental effect on your mind and how you. So the typical. It's fairly common to go into psychosis if you take excessive amounts of crystal meth, and what that means is that your sense of reality gets warped and changed, and you often believe that someone is out to get you, and you start believing kind of conspiracy theories, and someone is watching you, and there are very specific behaviors that often come once a person who takes too much crystal meth enters a psychosis. So it's very much about everyone is after you, and the scary thing with crystal meth is that it can, if it goes on for too long, so if someone abuses it or misuses it for too long, the psychosis that otherwise would eventually reside and go away if you stop using it, it can become chronic, and then it turns into schizophrenia. So then you just will have schizophrenia. So you hear voices, you see things that aren't there, and that becomes your reality. And so crystal meth can have that effect, and you can end up dying prematurely from that. It's not so often perhaps of a drug overdose, but of behaviors associated with you being in psychosis. So you might be seeing things that you think someone is after you, and you might be jumping off a balcony or something to get away from the perceived danger that is there, or you might be careless about other drugs that you're taking or other things that you're doing. So it's very complex and complicated with crystal meth, but when people die prematurely and crystal meth is a factor in it, it's often that allowed you to die prematurely from other reasons, as opposed to GHB or GBL, which is for people that don't know, is a depressant similar to alcohol. It has a similar effect to what alcohol has on your body. So it depresses you, it slows down your heart rate, and if you take, there's quite precise measurements that you take of GHB or GBL, so a few milliliters, and if you take a little bit too much, then you can pass out or fall asleep from it, and
die.
Yeah, it's you know, for dying, most of the time is when you accidentally have taken
Too much.
the wrong glass. Yeah, for example, if you have the GBL, which is a clear liquid, so that's also difficult. You can't really see necessarily what is a glass of water and what is a glass of GBL if someone has poured GBL into a glass. So those mistakes happens, and it happens in environments where you maybe have been taking drugs for some time and you're a little bit less caring on thinking about what you're doing. So if you take far too much, then you can die from it for sure, quite immediately. But if you take a little bit too much, then you will pass out and fall asleep, and then you can die from, for example, if you pass out on your back and no one is there to assist you and help you, you can suffocate from your tongue, or you could suffocate from your own vomit. So if you perhaps wake up and you start vomiting to get rid of the poison that GBL essentially is of your body, but you're laying in a position where sadly it's not uncommon that people die from suffocation of either their tongue or vomit, which is a horrendous way to go.
So we talk about GHB, GBL,
GHB and GBL. It's the same. It's the same. It's the same drug.
And then so that's big in the trans community as well. Also crystal meth, right?
Yeah.
And what was the other one?
The third one is methadone. It was previously referred to as plant food, or meow meow, or MCAT. It's got different names. So it's a stimulant. It's not so. Some people describe it to kind of an in between cocaine and amphetamine. It's normally a powder that you snort in some way, but you can dilute it in water and drink it as well. And that methadone just allows you to go on for longer. So does crystal meth by all means, for days. But methadone kind of just keeps you going in a way. So that the combination of the three can be very powerful. Can be very powerful in a sexual, amazing way. Obviously, many chemsex users would argue, but it can be very powerful in a destructive way as well.
So let's talk about prevention with drugs. Let's say trans woman is watching right now who is in this vicious cycle of taking drugs, and it's very hard for her to stop, whether she's an escort, whether she's just using it for in her own time, in her own sex life, in a private life. What can she do?
Yeah, good question. I think reaching out for help and support is really important. There is so we talked about as well, there's obviously a difficulty with the intersecting stigmas, right? Because there might be a stigma around taking drugs, and therefore making it difficult to reach out even to your friends or family to talk about it. If you can do that, I would say that should be a first step of getting support from the loved ones that you have around you. But otherwise, reaching out for support. There are many charities, non-profit organizations and support out there. I know that for many trans women that maybe have tried to reach out before, sometimes services aren't really catered for you, and haven't been developed with an understanding for trans women, and that is a problem. But I think there is a number of LGBTQ plus charities that are doing a decent job at that. So I would say, if you find that you're misusing drugs, or you feel like you're developing an addiction, reach out. One place would be to go to You Are Loved. We're building this directory which will have mental health support charities that we can signpost you onto. By all means, you can also just reach out to us directly. You can send us an email or a message on Instagram or whatever it is, and we will do what we can to signpost you and guide you and offer you advice. So that's one thing. But then there are other great charities out there that are doing great job. So there's, for example, London friend, and they have a specific service called Antidote. They are the biggest and oldest charity in London, so that's only if you are listening to this and you're London based. But they offer drug and alcohol support to anyone from the community, and they have trans staff, and they have developed specific. I think they're a fantastic charity, and they've developed specific services for the trans community. So I think that would be a place where you would feel welcome and heard and understood. But there's also Controlling Chemsex is another good charity that helps with primarily harm reduction when it comes to drug taking.
Right.
And then there is Holistic Q. Is that the name of it? Or we need to get that right.
With QE.
Yeah, which is also another charity that is focused specifically on the trans community, and they are providing kind of sexual health and well-being services and support, but they have also developed a chemsex response, so they should also be able to help. I think the important thing is to reach out for help and support, and my advice would be, don't wait until you are far down the rabbit hole, so to speak, until you're like feeling desperate and you're really developed a strong addiction. But if you're concerned about your use or misuse of drugs, reach out, get information, get support. It's better to kind of nip it in the bud there or do something about it rather than further down the line.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a very good point. Thank you, Mark, for mentioning this.
Who we are and what shaped us and how we are triggered and all of that is a product of our lives as we have lived it, right? So it's our life course. Everything has shaped us into the people that we are today.
When you see someone who is super strong, have the kind of compassion towards them and be like, what made you strong? You know?
Yeah. So we need to feel safe. So we need to have basic human rights. We need to know that we won't be persecuted walking down the street. We need to feel safe in our everyday life. For sure, trans people, trans women have your own set of challenges that are unique for you, that maybe as me as a gay or queer man can't understand fully.
Sometimes we think that the drug problem is when it's someone who is just really impacted. It's been taking drugs for a long time. But as you said, it can be after the first experience. It can be just thinking about it. It's the whole process of taking drugs. It's not just after it happens, but when you're thinking about it, right? During.
No, I agree. And I think it's also important to mention that my approach and You Are Loved's approach to drug taking, we are in no way saying that people should not be taking drugs. I'm not a proponent of abstinence and that drugs are bad. They're not bad. You know, a lot of people take recreational drugs and have a great time on them and enjoy them and take them and can control it and can control their use in the same way as they control their alcohol use or drinking. So I'm not saying that, but
even therapists right now, they use drugs to deal with like
increasingly,
psychedelics for
MDMA,
therapy,
ketamine,
MDMA as well.
Yeah,
it's all, I think, in the right doses and the right with the right people and professionals as well. Sometimes it's important too.
Yeah, and having awareness and education around. So that would be another advice to any trans woman out there taking these drugs or maybe being introduced to these drugs. Perhaps again, another like little examples. You move to London. You come from a small town in Poland or Sweden, wherever it might be, and you move to London and you get introduced to a big, vibrant trans community compared to where you came from, and you might get introduced to taking drugs or testing drugs. And again, I'm not saying, don't try anything, but educate yourself about how you take them, what are the risks, what are the side effects, in what way should you take them, what should you avoid doing. All these things I think is incredibly important, and it's even more important when it comes to these referred to as chemsex drugs, because they are incredibly potent, perhaps more potent than smoking some weed or taking a pump of ketamine or like drugs that aren't as as addictive and as
Harmful?
harmful, when taken in the wrong way. So I think it's incredibly important to educate yourself about especially GHB, GBL, and crystal methamphetamine. You need to know what you're doing, what you should avoid doing.
Yeah. So and that's the drugs that we've covered pretty much everything. Is there anything else you would like to add to drugs?
I think there's a broader conversation around chemsex and what that means and who participates in it and who does not. And I think it's clear that trans women are doing it, gay, bi, queer men are doing it, but I think it's important to think about drug use generally. You might not identify as a chemsex user, but if you don't take any of those drugs, the other drugs can also be harmful. Taking cocaine or amphetamine, they can also be harmful when you do it so it's not just those chemsex drugs that are the only concerns, but you should think about any. And that also includes alcohol, which is also a very common thing.
Alcohol is a legal drug. But it kills people too.
It kills a lot of people. And it's a big issue in the trans community, in the queer community, and across the population.
Of course. But as you said, alcohol is very alcohol, cigarettes, cocaine. It's very common amongst cis people as well. But these drugs are, the women we talked about, are really big in the trans and queer community, and now we know why, and now we know what people can do to prevent it, and where they can go if they struggle with taking drugs. So that was really interesting. Another topic I would like to talk about is suicide and prevention of suicide. So you work with people who try to commit suicide, or you work with people who were around suicide. How does it happen?
Again, really complex and very different for different people, right? There isn't really, I think when you talk about drugs and misuse and addiction, it's kind of a somewhat clearer path, I think, than someone ending up taking their life. There is also a lot of overlap between the two, I think, as drug misuse and addiction can, in some cases, I think, be seen as suicide. A slow suicide in a way. You're doing this to yourself, and you are slowly. Maybe increasing the risks that you're taking it for longer, taking more drugs, putting yourself in situations that are potentially dangerous, and then eventually you might have an accidental drug overdose. So you could. This is not black and white, but in some circumstances, you could say that it's kind of a slow suicide as well. But when it comes to suicide, otherwise, there are obviously many different reasons for people deciding to end their lives. But if we talk about kind of the broader picture of it, it has again to do with mental health. It has again to do often with a trauma that you have experienced in your life. And as we know, the trans community is disproportionately affected by trauma from just being born the way you are, and having to in many instances having to go through some resistance at best, and much more at worst. So I think for the trans community, some level of trauma is common that you have experienced, and maybe often through your informative years, when coming to terms with your trans identity. Some people obviously do that later in life, but for many that do it during their puberty years, those are informative years that are really important for shaping your mental health and well-being. So if you experience trauma during those years, that is likely to stay with you. So if we simplify it a bit, and this does not include everyone, because life isn't that simple. Life is complex, and there are so many different factors that contribute things. But if we just boil it down to a simple equation, like the more trauma you have experienced throughout your life and the more hardships that you've gone through, the more likely it is that will have an impact on your life, on your mental health, and on your general well-being, right? It's not true for everyone, obviously. Loads of people have gone through loads of trauma growing up, and they have become really strong and resilient people because of it. So it can also have the opposite effect, but in significant number of instances, it has that effect, that it contributes to poor mental health, and that then can, if you don't get the support and the love and whatever it is that you need, then it can deteriorate and end in suicide. So suicide rates are, for the trans community, are very high in the teenage years, for those reasons, that is often the time where a trans woman or trans girl at that point might come to terms with being trans, and then meeting a lot of resistance potentially from family, teachers, society, whatever it might be. So those years are sadly, we see the highest rates of suicides, and it's I think it's upsetting to talk about, because what's happening in society at the moment, that is sadly going to increase. The more resistance towards accepting trans people just the way they are that society puts up, the worse will the mental health outcomes be. So that is a really sad reality of what's happening right now in the Western world. Not in all countries. There are some countries in Asia that are making great progress
India,
on it. Yeah, and then
2 weeks ago, trans women are women.
Yeah,
by
Thailand.
Yeah,
and then we have the UK and the US that are like spearheading some like crusade. So suicide in that age group, that's the worst. That's when most trans young trans women or trans girl end their lives. But then it's also again in your 40s, where again is a time where, and there are many factors for that as well. It's a time where both suicides and drug-related deaths spikes again. At a certain point,
so your 40s in the trans community. Interesting.
But I mean, again, sadly, the life expectancy of trans women are still much lower than the general population. This is the thing. You asked me about this before, about statistics and numbers, right? And it's so difficult often to be able to give an accurate number, because it varies, depends on when was the research conducted, how was the research conducted. So you have to look at the research design and see, was that an accurate representation? Where was it US based, UK based? That will change. And then when, how many years ago? And often, actually, research obviously is a lengthy process. So you design a research project, you go out and you collect data, and then you analyze the data, then you write up and publish a paper about it, and then years will have gone by. And with the progress or regress that we see in the trans rights, these things will shift quite fast. So sadly, again, when attitudes, acceptance towards the trans community are decreasing, as we see in the UK and we see in the US, because that's what happens when politicians are pushing for laws that discriminate against trans people. As attitudes are decreasing, we see a quick, direct relationship towards mental health getting worse, suicide ideation increasing, and so it happens so fast. It's difficult to say exactly what the numbers are, but we know that trans women, trans people in general, are much more likely to attempt suicide and to succeed in ending their own lives. But numbers varies from 2 to 4 times more likely than the general population. I would say that it's probably more towards the 4 times more likely. Wow. So yeah, it's not a nice picture when it comes to that. A lot of progress has been done, but there's just so much further to go. And on top of that, in recent years, there is regressing again.
The fight is still happening. The fight hasn't been won. No. And that's why it's so important to have this conversation, because, dating trans women is not always glamorous, as we usually have on the podcast. We talk about some fun stuff, we talk about some struggles, but this topic is very real for lots of trans women, and even for people who date trans women, and men who sleep with trans women, for example, the drug use as well. So it's important to have this conversation and keep it going. Educate people, get rid of the stigma, get rid of the shame, ask for help, stuff like that.
And I think another piece of advice, so to speak, I think is incredibly important, and people don't always think about, is who we are and what shaped us and how we are triggered, and all of that is is a product of our lives as we have lived it, right? So it's our life course. Everything has shaped us into the people that we are today. And you might be today sitting here as a strong trans woman who are together in terms of your identity and who you are, and you have a strong self-esteem and so forth. But you are still a product of all these of, I don't know your life, but there's still a product of potential trauma experiences you've had that have been incredibly negative.
Yeah, I'm like, honey, the trauma here is real. As you said, I'm the final product of the trauma of anything that's happened to me. I'm very open about it, and I don't mind talking what happened to me. But as you said, like, here I am, I can seem strong. I can see I have the podcast. I can see, I can seem I got my shit together, but I still struggle. I do. Mental health, all of that. So it is important when you see someone who is super strong, have the kind of compassion towards them and be like, what made you strong?
Definitely.
Because yes, you can be born super strong, if you have this upbringing, or if you go from this culture, from this nationality, but sometimes people are really strong and resistant and resilient because of the trauma that shaped them and that made them the way they are right now.
100%. And another aspect to further kind of advice on it, which I think is important to understand as well, is that if you look at kind of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that humans need. Are you familiar with the hierarchy of needs? So humans needs, like physiological needs. We need food, we need sleep, we need sex, we need water.
Yes.
Those are physiological needs. The second part of the pyramid or triangle that has 5 parts, I think, is safety. So we need to feel safe. So we need to have basic human rights. We need to know that we won't be persecuted walking down the street. We need to feel safe in our everyday life. After that comes compassion and love. So feeling that you have a community that loves you and that you feel loved, and acceptance. So acceptance, and then comes further kind of self actualization, or living your best and being your authentic self. But the hierarchy here dictates that if you don't have the basic need, so if you don't have food and water, then that's all you're going to focus on, because you need that to exist. Let's say you have food and water, then you need safety. So you need to have basic human rights. You need to feel safe in society. And if you don't feel safe in society, there won't be as much time for you to focus on acceptance, love, compassion. That is the next step. And again, what we're seeing with the regression of trans rights, you, in a way, have jumped back one step on the Maslow's needs hierarchy of needs, and are back on kind of the safety thing. That you have to now again think about, how do I feel safe? And that again will worsen mental health outcomes, because you don't have as much time in the day to think about these things and consider these things and work on community and so forth, if you feel unsafe in your environment. So I think again it's worth considering where we're going, where we have been, when you interact with a trans woman, with any person really, and understanding that it's not just what's happening right here, right now, what you appear to be as a person, but it is, you're a sum of all the things that have happened, and the things that are currently happening are affecting you on a really daily basis.
Would you say that your organization, You Are Loved, teaches people also how to be kinder and more compassionate towards each other? Because if we live in the society where we are a minority, we need other people to be nicer towards us, right? We need cishet people to be compassionate, to be understanding, be loving, be caring. So I think goes hand in hand. What can people who are not trans or who are not in the queer community, what can they do to support us in your organization? Or
advice would be, just the most basic advice would be to always stand up for us as trans people, as queer people. If you're an ally, if you're a cis hetero person, always stand up for us, always protect us, not just when we are in the same room, but at all times. So if
Yeah.
you hear some micro
It's
or some
conversation about us.
yeah,
Yeah.
and some inappropriate trans joke in your workplace, there
Yeah.
are no trans people around. Stand,
Say,
question it,
say,
challenge
this
it.
is wrong.
So in every situation, everywhere, you're not just an ally or supporter when it suits you or when you are with a trans woman. You need to do that at all times.
Yes.
So I think that's really important. But then I think what is a potential real strength and what we can do more of, and what I think You Are Loved is about, is mobilizing the community to kind of support each other and across different parts of the community. And I think it's really important for queer sexual minority people to be better at supporting trans women and trans people in general, as well as hetero, straight, cisgendered people supporting the trans community and the wider queer community. And that, I think, is about finding commonality, understanding where we are not so dissimilar. The struggles and our our dreams and aspirations, what we want in life, what we need in life. We're not different types of creatures, right?
Yeah.
We're not like sitting in some different silos. And as queer people in general, we share a lot of the struggles and challenges that the trans people do. So I think queer people, sexual minority people, gay men, gay women, queer men could be much better at finding commonalities and understanding that we are so similar in so many ways. So we experience, you for sure, trans people, trans women have your own set of challenges that are unique for you, that maybe as me as a gay or queer man can't understand fully, or because I haven't got the same lived experiences. But in many ways we do. Many of us were also gender non-conforming as kids, and many queer people are still today and are looked at in a maybe disapproving way because we are not adhering to stereotypical heteronormative ways of how to be and how to behave. So I think within the wider queer community, we could be better at that. And I want You Are Loved to facilitate that. So creating events that facilitates commonality and how we can better support each other in an active, engaged way. And I think extending that to hetero cis general population, they can do the same. There is loads of commonalities and ways in which we can, and many hetero cis straight people also experience. They are minorities in many other ways. They might be neurodiverse. They might be from an ethnic minority background. They might have a body shape that are being stigmatized for. There are many different ways in which we can have shared challenges and understand each other better. So I think working against the kind of us and them paradigm where I look a certain way or I am a certain way, my identity is a certain way compared to yours is different, and looking more for commonality, similarities would go a long way in kind of increasing sympathy, empathy, and understanding for each other.
I love it. Thank you, Marc. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I'm blown away. I'm blown away by the information, the knowledge that you shared with us today. I really, really appreciate it. Is there anything else you would like to add before we go on Patreon?
No, well, a shout out for the trans community, for any trans woman that listens or watches this podcast, or for anyone else, by all means. So You Are Loved. We really exist. We are a community. We are about mobilizing the community, and the services that we are developing and providing are only as strong as the support that we get from the community. So we've launched this directory, which is for the entire LGBTQ plus community, and it's about signposting to community and support. This directory will only work if we get loads of organizations and support groups and community initiatives on board, and we can only do that if we get your help to signpost or contact us, send us a message and say, I know of these amazing social group that is a group of trans women that goes together and they paint. There's a painting here in the room. They get together and they paint together, and they welcome new members to their social group, for example, and they could join our directory. And again, this young trans woman who's moving from a small town to a big city can find community through our directory. So that's number one. The second one is for our bereavement support. If you are impacted by this, if you have lost a loved one to suicides or drugs or any other reason, and you think that you need support going through your bereavement and the grievance, please reach out to us again. Our support services are completely free, so we have weekly online and in-person services, and they're facilitated by queer therapists, and it's a really inclusive and warm environment where we can help you. So, and finally, I would also love any kind of feedback, ideas, suggestions of ways in which we can be more inclusive of the trans community, how we can kind of, what we talked about, finding commonalities with the different parts of the community, and we can work much more in an engaged and in a meaningful way, not just like passive support, yeah, we support your rights, you support our rights, but how we can
actively
work. So please reach out to us if any suggestions, advice, comments, recommendations. We are very keen to listen and to learn and to grow from that.
I love that. Now that's what I call a community feeling, a community spirit, because it's we are all part of that. And I just really loved what you said just now when you mentioned if you have any feedback or if you know anyone. So I love that your organization grows by being together, by being helped by other people, and it's I can really feel that we are all in this together. Because everyone knows someone who is struggling. Everyone knows someone who might be able to help them. So it's so important. I'll make sure I add You Are Loved organization's website in the description below episode. All the info that is necessary, I will add there at the end of the episode. And I'm so happy that you accepted my invitation
thank
to
you
be
for
on the
having
show.
me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. So I'm excited to go on Patreon, where me and Marc are going to talk about some real stories from drug overdose, drug misuse. It's going to be real. It's going to be without filter, as always. And I'm really excited to learn and learn more about this topic. So I'll see you there.
See you there.
And remember, we are back every Thursday. So much realness, it will make you blush. Every Thursday on Trans Crash. Take care.
It is more common for trans women to experience sexual violence. It might be that a man might be very sexually attracted to trans women generally, but he might have a level of shame or kind of feelings around that he hasn't really dealt with. Men not quite having figured out their sexuality or what it is that makes them so attracted to trans women. And never normalize anything. It's never okay for a man to have sex with you if you are passed out, for example. If you can't consent, then it's not okay. And
what is the most common drug to get overdosed by?
Just a few drops, a milliliter or milliliter and a half or whatever it might be into a drink. And if you have a full drink, you won't be able to taste that it's there. Why do people die suddenly and prematurely from suicides or drugs? It often boils down to a sense of feeling I'm not loved. I'm lonely, no one cares about me.